We'll see how many attendees we get today. We had quite a few signed up. Be fine. Hello, everybody. As you pile in the room here, I'm Jeff Tamblin. I'm the Executive Director of Video Trust, and welcome to the webinar. I'm going to let everybody kind of pile in here as we wait for you. And I'm going to see who's showing up today so we can say hi. It's a little bit like, what was that show, Romper Room? Or, you know, we had Miss Virginia. She always said, "Who do I see today? Romper, Scomper, Bomper, Boo." And then she would call out names of people. I wonder if they were actually there. Anyway, there's Julie Wong. Okay, this is great. We have a nice turnout happening here. Yay. Very cool. Okay, I'm letting everybody pile in here, but you are at the Video Trust Public Library Response to the Pandemic webinar. We're going to run about an hour here. We've got great panelists and my charming co-host, and we're all set for having I hope this will be a pretty productive and fun time for everybody. A little break and an opportunity to take a look at everything that's been going on. A little bit later in the program, after we've done some sort of targeted interviews with our two panelists, we're going to open up the floor, and some of you will be able to share and talk about what's been going on. I'm looking for somebody in particular. Not on yet. Okay, well, we'll see. Anyway, all right. Well, we've got a pretty good group here starting out, and it's 1:02. I'm going to go ahead and kind of read my little opening here so we can get this started. Let's see. So as I mentioned earlier, welcome. You are at the not K through 12, you're at the public library webinar about responses to the pandemic. So thanks for attending, panelists and co-hosts, especially. Video Trust is a nonprofit organization that advocates for libraries and film. We provide professional development and resources for K through 12 public and academic librarians. You can learn more and sign up for our monthly newsletter at our website, videotrust.org. As you well know, a lot has happened since the beginning of March, which is when the country and the libraries began shutting down. Libraries that continue to provide access and resources relied heavily on the community of librarians, especially those with knowledge of video and streaming, and we're here to share experiences in the hope of improving services and procedures, not just as the isolation continues, because who knows how this year is going to go, maybe several months hence, but perhaps to prepare for other emergencies, and because sometimes in emergencies we learn things we can use in our everyday work lives. Okay, I'm joined today by two panelists from library systems that are basically right next to each other, but very different in size and scope. Elena Rossi-Snook is the collection manager of the Reserve Film and Video Collection at the New York Public Library. I've been wanting to say New York City Public Library because our other panelist is Janet McCoogie. She's head of Children's Services at the New City Library in New City, New York. So you can see I'm getting confused already. I'll try to keep all that separate and straight. My co-host today is Charles Cobyne, the Digital Outreach Librarian at the University of Pennsylvania and a fellow board member at Video Trust. We do have maybe Aaron DeWitt Miller from UNT will show up a little bit later in the show, but we'll see what happens here. We're going to ask our panelists to tell us about their experiences for the first half of the webinar, roughly. And then we're going to open up the floor, so to speak, and we'll invite you to speak and talk about your experiences or, questions. We're open to talking about technology and procedures and anything else that you find worthy of conversation here. If you're unfamiliar with a Zoom system, and I can't believe that anybody is at this point, but just in case you're kind of a newbie, there's a raise hand feature you can use. If you mouse over the screen, you'll find it. And there's a toolbar there, with chat and Q&A, and you can ask a question at any time. We'll try to work those into the conversation on Q&A or chat. All right, so we'll be recorded today and available in about 24 hours. So if you know somebody who's missing this, we're going to send out the email with the links, and we post that online as well. And you can always find our recorded sessions on our website, videotrust.org. So let's get started. I want to talk first, if we can. Janet was here and gracious enough to come back, but I wanted to start with Elena. I think everybody knows the New York Public Library exists. I mean, so you probably don't need to tell us everything about it, but we would probably like to know a little bit more about what you do and what your life was like, you know, before the pandemic, and kind of what the big bullet points of change have been since then. So.
Cool. Okay. Hi, everyone. So this year is actually our 125th anniversary year. We had a lot of programming going on around that that's had to be either abandoned or we're in the process of pivoting. And that's kind of a good point to start talking about the library and what it is, because even 125 years ago when we were set up, we had the 125th anniversary is actually the beginning of the research divisions at NYPL. And then the branch division came along like 3 years later. And that's always been this interesting dichotomy within the institution, is that we have what I like to think of as like silos. So there's like the research silo, and then there's the branch silo. And those have very different funding lines. They have different missions, kind of. I mean, we all align on our mission to serve the public and to promote literacy, but just in different ways, being that one is dedicated to research material and the other is like the branch system. So we have 88 branches and 4 research centers at the library. And where I come in is a little bit interesting, because about 15 or maybe even 20 years ago now, a lot of functions became centralized into this shared unit called Book Ops that we share with Brooklyn Public Library. And so we have a selection person there, we have an acquisition person there, but my department has historically been even going back through historic documents, there's kind of a failure to pin a name to it. We were the film library, and then we became the Donnell Media Center. And that had a certain cachet to our users and also to the independent film community. But when I started 20 years ago, we even were floundering to come up with terminology to describe what our function was, now that libraries no longer needed, you know, a single entity. You know, branches were buying their own material, and you had the proliferation of media throughout the whole system. So what function does a centralized media center serve in this new model? And what I've come up with, I finally decided that we need to define the role of what's now called the Reserve Film and Video Collection as being that body and personnel who facilitate the use of educational material, you know, throughout the system and to our patrons. So you will find, you know, within our collection, you will find feature films made in Hollywood, but it is our mission to promote the educational use of those works. Whereas you can also go to a branch and get those same titles off the shelf and use it any way you want. I'm going to be talking to our branch librarians about maybe how to do a program with Black Panther, you know, and oh, hey, look, here's this independent film from 1969 that might make for a really dynamic public program. So that's what I do. And historically, my department and I have valued the members that we see with the Video Trust. You know, I have been working with National Film Board of Canada, and my goodness, that's a partnership that goes back to the 50s. So making sure that we're able to integrate those relationships and knowing where to find really good educational content is a big part of what I do. So not just making educational film accessible, but also promoting its desirability.
You were talking earlier before we started about some of the things that happened, how the library responded. And I'm wondering if you can run that down again for us just a little bit. You seem to think the flow of information was pretty good. And I'm wondering if you can also tell us a little bit about how you leveraged any kind of video or streaming technology among the branch's staff. I mean, how are you relating to your public now?
Okay, so the flow of information was really, really good. So by the time March 13th rolled around, which is when New York City started kind of closing down, I was prepared to, I mean, I went to work with 2 IKEA bags and I was able to pack up my office. So it was like I was telling Janet, it's like that scene in a movie where, like, you know, you have to evacuate some state-run building before the insurgents.
Burn everything and run.
Yeah, I mean, not quite like that, but like you're thinking like the drive, you know, and I was laughing to myself even as I was doing it, like you're looking like, make sure like uploading, you know, the upload wheel on the drive, like, come on files, upload onto my drive, you know, it's like, it felt like, you know, a flight situation, but I was able to go in. We had laptops prepared for staff with the back end of the catalog loaded onto them so that cataloging work could be done. It was awesome.
When was that done? When?
They must have been working very late Thursday into the night Thursday to prepare those materials for people to pick up and bring home by Friday.
So that wasn't done any time in advance of the pandemic. That was a very kind of last minute. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was like, hey, who wants it? Who wants to be able to catalog from home? Who thinks they're going to be using Sierra at home and need the back end? So that was excellent. That was really great. So I came, you know, I went home prepared. I moved my daughter and myself into upstate New York so that we wouldn't have to be in a tiny city apartment during this period. So I brought all that stuff with me. And from there, I was able to think about, I mean, immediately, that's the thing. I was like, okay, how are we going to continue service to the public? And I think, like, for anyone who's known like my shtick in other, well, yeah, here too, but certainly also over at the Association of Moving Image Archivists, I'm like the physical media person, right? Like, I'm still buying film prints, I'm demanding DVDs, but this has been such a wonderful opportunity to break from that and look at service in general and how is service being done, and realizing that, like, of course you can't serve physical media during this kind of situation. And that was like eye-opening. And I don't know, I just was able to see the forest from the trees. And the forest for me now is to be like the public access institution that offers the most format diversity. Like, ideally, as we are negotiating this period and come, you know, into like going back into reopening, like hopefully soon we will be an institution where you can come in with a library card. And let's say there's a work that was produced on 16mm film. You can see it in its native format. If it was transitioned into home entertainment formats, you could see it on video, you could see it on DVD. And hopefully, because we're working on it, you'll be also able to look at that same title streaming. So that is the new goal, is to be the most format diverse institution, public institution in the world.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, you know, small goals.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys are kind of a big gun, so it's fun to see where you're going. And I think it's especially interesting to see how, you know, the organization had the kind of brain power collectively to sort of throw all these laptops together and you know, knowing that everyone was going to disperse out into the world. Now, I do think you had a little bit of a leg up on some of the rest of the world because of unfortunate circumstances in the past. I mean, there have certainly been, in very recent memory, some emergencies in New York that probably gave you more impetus to think about what happens if. And I don't think people think about that as much, for example, where I'm from in eastern Kansas.
Mhm.
We all feel pretty insulated here sometimes. So interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting to consider.
I noticed Erin has appeared there on my screen, so she's somewhere in the ether here. And Charles, did you have anything you wanted to talk to Elena about specifically?
Well, it just makes a lot of what we've been talking about makes me think about, the, disaster preparations, and we're all removed from our physical collections right now. So we can't see them. There are very few people in my library, an academic library, who have access to the physical collections right now because we're banned from the premises. So I'm just wondering, like, are there things that you've taken into account, in terms of like, just making sure that the environment for your physical materials is okay. I mean, in an urban location, as we all know, we have problems with pest control and
Yeah.
temperature and things like that. And I wonder if you have anything to say about that.
I mean, that's like a management overview outside of my pay grade, but I can say, like, I mean, first of all, we're not there. Like, we're trying to figure out what is reopening going to look like. We already have a facility, because I'm physically located in a research branch. That's where, like, my department is really interesting because we bridge the branch silo and the research silo, in that I'm a lending collection with research material. So, like, my films are vaulted in a film vault, in an actual physical archive. So our 16 collection is archivally stored. The DVDs are on site, but we have, I mean, priceless museum pieces in the Library for the Performing Arts. So we already have a facilities staff and a conservation staff who are really sensitive to emergency preparedness, and they're on it. And we had our facilities crew doing temp checks and all of that. And I think I'm sure that they're set up to even check that remotely. But we did have them actually flowing into the building, using safety precautions just to make sure that everything is fine. So yeah, like, we are fortunate in, as Jeff said, like, we've had Sandy, we've had different crises that have prepared us for this. And we have the staff with the knowledge and the tools to ensure that this is at least not a surprise. Nothing, has not been accounted for. But, okay, I want to talk about something before any other questions. Let's talk about the 1978 summer issue of Library Trends. So that issue was dedicated to the whole issue to films in public libraries. Everyone, you must read this. It is so great.
Wait, are you saying the 1978 issue?
Yeah. Yeah, and
I've got that right back here on the shelf.
Oh, but you don't need to have it on your shelf because the University of Illinois digitized the whole collection. This is where, like, oh my God, the fact that these words are coming out of my mouth, like, hell has frozen over. Digitization of collections turns out to be totally dope in a situation like that.
Do you have a link to that? Do you have a link to that particular thing you're talking about?
I do. I've been using it heavily because
I wonder if you could post it on the chat thing.
Okay.
So we can,
I would have to do, you know what, when Janet is speaking, I'll dig around.
Yeah.
Because like, one of the things is that there has been a need to redefine the role of motion pictures in the public library, and both for the public and for administrators and leadership. And so I actually had to rely heavily on some of the really well-crafted statements that were made by some of the pioneers in film librarianship, like Violet Meyer and Grace Stevenson, who, I mean, continuously were saying, like, no, media literacy is important. Literacy, textual literacy can happen across multiple formats, whether it's written or filmic. And so reading through that has been great because I've been blogging. I mean, that's like, the lowest ladder of public outreach in my mind, but it's great because I really love writing essays. So being able to write about, like, hey people, while I have you as a captive audience, like, let's talk about movies that matter. and whether that matters anymore. And being able to refer, even on a personal level, like friends with children, and being able to tell them, because they're super stressed out, trying to get their kids schooled at home. Their kids are going rogue on, you know, the screens, and being able to say, look, you can tell your 8-year-old to go on National Film Board of Canada website, and basically anything is fair game. Like there's stuff there that supports their curriculum from school. Like, oh, you're second graders, you're learning about rivers and waterways. Like you need to watch how the Great Lakes were formed. And then also telling them, like, even if they're clicking on abstract animation, it's going to be really good content, you know, and like, that's a good spot for you. Being able to direct people to places like folk streams has been great. So blogging about that, but also at the same time, being allowed by those entities and by our cataloging team at NYPL to embed links into our catalog, directing our patrons to those third-party streaming entities. So, you know, okay, you want to watch how the Great Lakes were formed, you can find that in our catalog now. You know, and you, again, you can see all the formats. There's the record for 16, there's a record for VHS, and oh look, now there's a record where you click in and it directs you over to nsb.ca. So
this is amazing. You know, those are all astounding resources, and I'm glad you drew everybody's attention to that issue of library trends, because I want to see that link, and I really like what it's saying, or what you're telling me it's saying about, especially about media literacy, because that has been an issue for so long in this country. And that's one of the reasons that Video Trust is in existence, because we believe that there's a little shortage of that in the United States. The influence of film is, and just motion pictures, video, everything. I mean, it's being created by the mountain load every minute in our society, and we're sort of not fully aware of its influence on us. We don't think critically enough about it, and that's one of the reasons for this organization's very existence. So I'm really happy that to further any discussion about that.
yeah,
We should move on, please, though, to Janet Makuji, who's here from the New City Public Library, which is just up the road, slightly across the bridge from New York City. So you guys are right there together almost, and you have similar names, and I'm the only one who's probably getting confused by that, but you have a different library experience. Janet, you were here a couple of weeks ago, and we were, oh gosh, it's been almost a month since we talked with you originally, and I'm sort of curious to know how things are going. But can you run down a little bit of information for us about the New City Public Library, and tell us a little bit about the library itself, your job, kind of set the stage for us a little bit so we can talk about what happened during the pandemic.
Sure. The New City Library is just across the Hudson River from New York Public Library, and people get us confused all of the time. We serve quite a few towns that are in Rockland County. We have, last count, about 32,000 square foot building at this stage of the game, 150,000 volumes, annual circ just over 500,000. We serve about 50,000, 52,000 people. When our next census comes out, the numbers I'm sure will go up on that. I'm the head of the Children's Services Department. We also have Children's Services Department also coordinates with our Adult Services Department and the Teen Department as well. So even though we say we have separate departments and department heads, we work together all the time. So when last we left, that was March 13th. 10 weeks later, we're still working from home, and a lot of policies and things have had to be created and changed for this new work environment that we have now. Yeah. It has not lessened since we've been off from work, quote unquote. I find myself and a lot of my colleagues are spending more time working from home than we normally would be if you were getting in the car, commuting, going to work, and commuting back home again. Since that commute time is out of the picture now, I mean, where I live, my commute is about 1 hour and 15 minutes each way, back and forth to work. I'm suddenly finding I'm taking more like 2.5 hours and adding it onto my work day now. And my husband keeps saying, you can't be doing this, you know. And I'm like, but I got 3 more things to do today. You know? So, And I'm not the only person that's been doing that. I've heard from a lot of colleagues too that, you know, it's hard when work is trapped in the same house where you live. It's hard to sort of put it aside and say, okay, that's enough for today, you know, when there's so many things that we're juggling plates in the air at this point. So we've been working on all kinds of things. There's been a reopening committee formed for steps to take if and when we can start reopening.
Okay.
Our library has a reopening committee, and the regional library system, which is 4 counties, they also have a system in place also at this point. None of these systems can move forward at this point because Governor Cuomo has not officially given permission for our region of New York to start what he calls unpausing phase 1 of New York on pause. So we haven't reached all the criteria yet for having our area begin to be allowed to open up to things like construction and medical personnel, things like that. So the big question that the New York Library Association has been asking is, in Governor Cuomo's plan, are libraries considered part of phase 2, which is curbside retail, if we decide we're doing curbside services,
Yeah.
no patrons in the building, no programming, or if we are in phase 4, which is education in schools. Now, a lot of our public libraries are chartered with the school systems, and a lot of them have votes that are tied to school systems. We haven't gotten a definitive answer yet from the governor's office as to which phase of his unpaused New York libraries are considered to be in. If we're in phase 2 with the retails, or phase 4 with education. So until we get word from the state saying what phase libraries are in, we can keep planning and planning and planning, but we can't do anything until we get the go-ahead.
Your shutdown experience was considerably different than that of the New York City Public Library. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and maybe follow up a little bit with like what the technological picture is?
Yeah, when we were there March 13th, on the 12th, the Thursday night before, we were open until 9 o'clock. And we were scrambling around we were sending the janitors out, trying to get any hand sanitizer and wipes that we could find anywhere in the community. And it was like nothing to be had anywhere. Fridays, we generally open 2 hours later than normal to the public. It gives us 2 hours to update computers and have meetings and things like that. And it was decided just about 11 o'clock on Friday that we were not going to be allowing patrons in the building that day. But staff was going to remain and do our usual work. And we would hear something from the county health department by the end of the day as to what we were planning for our weekend opening. And about 3:30, 4 o'clock, we got word from the county saying, what are you people still doing in your building? Everybody grab your purse and go home. It was like, okay, so we're coming back on Monday? We're not opening on the weekends? And no, we're still home 10 weeks later. They would not let anybody back in the building whatsoever. So being a children's librarian and my staff, suddenly you're thrown into a virtual world where not everybody has the equipment or the internet connection speed at home to be able to start creating YouTube videos or story times, book talks, anything like that. So that was a big issue for us to have to overcome. All the puppets and the storybooks that you want to use and all the props, well, they're all locked up in the library. Fortunately for myself and one other staff member who's a former kindergarten teacher, we have a lot of stuff at home. So that's how we sort of made it through the first couple weeks of starting to do programming. Now, I had never created video content before, and neither did anybody else on my staff. So that was a whole learning curve for us as well. It was suddenly like, oh, well, I've seen things on YouTube, but create something for YouTube? I haven't done that before.
So did you create, you're creating stuff for YouTube?
Yes.
Yes. Can you put a link up to that maybe in a little bit when you're?
I can, yeah.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, we have all different programs on there now. We've got things like Rhyme Time for little kids, nature walks, history book talks, nonfiction book talks, story time, musical things, puppet shows. But all that was just within 4 weeks, we had 100 videos up.
Do you have your own channel?
So we do.
Okay.
We do.
Yeah, if you could link
But
us
we
to
went from
that,
0 to 100 really fast. So,
And
yeah.
that's
so some
interesting
of the
that there's
quality
so
on some
much
is better than others, but
like the explosion in online programming. I mean, do you feel how much has it grown, would you say? And you know, do you think that it's always going to be part of public library programming from here on out?
we've been discussing that. In fact, our fiscal budget starts July 1st for the next year. And we already are having discussions about how we're going to be shifting the print collection money around to cover things like more ebooks and streaming services like, Hoopla and Canopy and Overdrive materials. And the fact that we had to move the entire summer reading club for children is now going to have to be online. All the performers I contracted with, I've had to contact them and say, is it possible for you to do something online for us? And that was another thing. We all had to learn how to, first of all, the library had to purchase Zoom accounts. We had to set all that up. And then we all had to learn how to set up meetings, webinars, whatever, using Zoom.
Mhm.
And then some of the performers were comfortable with that, others were not. So we're going to go totally virtual for performances, our summer reading club, our book recording is all going to be online. And I don't see us in the future going backwards. I really don't. I think people are going to expect to find the library having a presence on YouTube or wherever our channel is going to be, and having virtual story time all the time, and puppet shows and musical sing-alongs and whatever else we're going to put on there. I think they're just going to get used to having on-demand programming. It's not going to be enough to say Tuesdays at 1:30 there'll be story time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not convenient for everybody, but you can plop somebody down in front of the computer at any time of the day or night and say, here, watch story time. Totally different experience than being in person, I think. However, the way people work these days, I think it's here to stay.
That is really interesting. And it brings me to a point that I wanted to ask both of you about, which is that one of the reasons that public libraries were created, especially in the United States, to my understanding, I'm not a historian of this, but what little I know, is that the idea was to be able to provide materials to people who didn't have the means to buy them. It was a way of enhancing people's citizenship or presence in the United States, and giving everybody a shot at a decent education and some really good advanced resources. You can't afford to buy books, and now of course movies and stuff like that, you can find them at the library. But a lot of people in the lower income groups, and of course this includes a lot of minorities, are unable to access currently a lot of the stuff that's available. And I wonder what kind of, I know it's a concern for you. I'm wondering, is there any means of addressing that through your libraries, or is it being discussed? Can you brief us a little bit about that?
We did purchase quite a few hotspots. We had some to begin with that really weren't circulating all that well in our community before the whole pandemic thing hit. Hotspots and Chromebooks are basically the way we've been going at this stage of the game. Again, that's coming up in our budget discussions again, is going to be providing many more hotspots and Chromebooks or other PCs, whatever we have that we can, get together for people. We're trying to work with the school system as well. The school system sent home Chromebooks, laptops with as many students as they could on their final day. The problem is if you send home a child with a Chromebook and they have no Wi-Fi, doesn't do them much good. So yeah, that is a big issue.
You don't feel, it sounds like, I'm sorry, Elaine, I'm gonna let you answer too.
No, I'll let you follow.
It sounds like, Janet, that you don't think that's being addressed effectively though yet.
I'm not sure that the communities that really need the hotspots and the Chromebooks and things are even aware that the library exists in their community and that it's free. We still have a lot of new immigrant families in Rockland County. We have a lot of transient people that come through Rockland County. And the problem is that traditionally they're not library users, and quite a few of them are especially afraid of anything to do with the government because they're afraid that when they fill out for a library card, they will also be reported to ICE and they will be deported. And that's not something that we would ever do, but that's the fear in a lot of the communities.
Okay. Oh, Elena, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Sorry, I'm scribbling notes like, you know, someone who's like on a political debate stage here. Because the thing that you're talking about actually didn't develop until the turn of the century. The modern library idea liberated books from stacks. It created children's reading rooms. It created bookmobiles. And that was happening at the same time the motion pictures were coming into existence. And so talking about access to materials and access to educational films has always been tethered quite closely together. And that was like one of the, I mean, really what we're talking about, it's social justice, it's economic justice. And those are the things that are, we as Americans, we see those things being baked into the public library model. So, right, like how do you then talk about those things and sustaining those things when you have technology gaps?
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was like the digital divide was the argument for continuing the purchase of DVDs. And I have to say that, like, even as I'm rapidly, you know, trying to acquire links to guide people out to, you know, pre-existing streaming material, we're also talking about subscription services again, but also at the same time, making sure that those people I'm linking to, that we're good financial partners, you know, good business partners, so that we don't leave people, when we do reopen, abandoned, and that we do have physical formats. What to do now that those folks don't have access to the physical formats? I mean, NYPL has been lending hotspots and Wi-Fi for a few years now.
Yeah.
But I don't know, this is one of those, it's just one of those things to like keep in mind that we are having to underserve, you know, we just have to make sure that that's accounted for. That knowledge, and constantly be thinking around, okay, if like that doesn't sit well with us, then what? You know, what are we going to do next? How can we work around this?
All right. I want to take a really, really quick little teeny break, and then I want to, Julie Warren asked a really interesting question, and I want to tie that in with what we're talking about here a little bit. But first I want to put in a word about another webinar coming up June 11th. From Video Trust. This is a starter session for librarians who want to learn about streaming. So if you're new to streaming, you want to learn more about how to do it, how to find appropriate resources, what the system requirements might be, much more, this is the webinar to attend. Your presenters will be Sarah McCleskey from Hofstra and Scott Spicer from the University of Minnesota. Both librarians have many, many years experience with streaming services, and we're very fortunate to have them at this upcoming event. If you're new to streaming, register on our website at videotrust.org. Look under the professional development tab up there, and you'll find links. While you're there, also sign up for our newsletter, which comes out at least monthly, and keep up with everything we're doing, because we really hope to be doing much more programming about video, film, and streaming and related subjects for public librarians. And if you like today's webinar, please tell your colleagues in the library world, because we want more outreach, please, and we need your help. Let me go back to the group here real quick, and I also want to allow Julie Warren to talk. She had a really interesting question. Julie, if you'll unmute, thank you. I want you to talk a little bit, ask your budget question, and I kind of want to tie that in with how that's going to impact some of the underserved communities.
Sure, thanks. So I was just asking that with closures and the impact to the economy, if any of you other libraries are facing major budget cuts and staffing reductions. I know that's something that we're facing right now. And with the majority of my job focused on public programming and the city looking at it and saying public programming isn't going to come back, volunteers are not going to come back in quite some times, and they're having to cut budgets. They're making some hard decisions. So we're facing the loss of staff. We're facing the loss of service hours. We're having to obviously decrease our budgets, things like that. So I'm just wondering if any of you are facing that type of challenge and how you're doing it. We of course pivoted and started a YouTube channel and started public programming online as well. But in terms of priorities, that definitely is not taking the priority when they're faced with some budget deficit. So just kind of wondering how you're all reacting.
Over to you, ladies, and maybe Charles, if you, and Aaron is hovering in the background. Anybody want
My situation is that we have a unionized library. So there cannot be any layoffs, firings, whatever, unless we do things according to the contract. And COVID-19 is not in the contract. So we're gonna have to keep people on. The library director did send out a letter the other day saying, look, we're working on the reopening plans, the scheduling and things. Let me know confidentially if you have issues with coming back, whether you're just afraid to, you'd rather just take retirement, you don't know what you're going to do because you have no childcare at this point, your child's childcare center is not going to be reopening, just to give us an idea of who might be wanting to back out of positions. But as far as budget cuts affecting staffing, we can't do that because we are a union library. One thing that is going to be affected greatly is that we had planned to do a major building renovation and expansion in the next year and a half. We have a lot of the money saved up. However, we were expecting some help from New York State. And at this point, the state is floundering horribly.
Okay.
So there's not going to be any help coming there. So I'm assuming all these great plans for renovating the building and adding more technology and adding more meeting space, which is something our community desperately needs, is more meeting space. And at this point, you're not allowed to have meeting space. So I've got a feeling that's not going to be happening in the near future. So as far as your answer to budget cuts, I think not so much budgets are going to be cut, but budgets are just going to be realigned to cover different services and different materials at this point than traditional materials would be.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, for me, like, I'm sure there are several people earning their keep right now, having to tackle these questions, and that thankfully is not me, you know, so yeah.
Okay. Julie, where are you from?
Palm Springs, California. So we're very reliant on tourism, as you can imagine. And with the city closure, those funds, TOT tax, all sorts of things, just sort of dried up overnight. And we are also union, but because the city was able to declare a state of emergency, then they are able to do the staffing and budget cuts that they're working on right now. So that's kind of where we are.
I mean, I can say, like, I'm just glad we're in a state and a city where we have government bodies aligned in their support of public libraries. So we're also, our branch sides are union, and those folks are being paid. And I see from the content they're generating that they are working. But I feel better now than maybe I would have in previous years about the library being a priority for funding. But I don't know, we'll see.
Okay. I noticed one of my friends is here, Jennifer Gum-Fowler, who lives in Kincaid, Kansas, which is a very little place of about 300 people. I'm trying to get her attention on chat. So I know she's, you know how it is. She might have kids running around the house and not be fully paying attention, but I'm trying to see if I can get her to talk a little bit, because she's a citizen librarian in this one-room library, and her situation is so different than many other people. So, if I can get her on the line, we'll talk to her as well. I'm curious to know, what do you tell me, has this given you some opportunity to think any sort of different out of the box thinking? And I'm talking to everybody here about what libraries do and what they're maybe supposed to do. Have you had more thinking about, kind of out of the box thoughts or rethinking things? Anybody? No? Okay.
I mean, I could say that the online programming, like it's helpful to be able to like still be quite like dedicated to our usual services. Like there's no way we're going to pivot away from the value of the public library as a community meeting space, but to be able to think, outside the box about, well, can we redefine that community in an online space? Can we add services rather than, replace services? And that's an exciting opportunity. Like within the first week, I was talking with JT Takagi at Third World Newsreel, and they had already figured out how to do a public program with a Zoom chat with filmmakers. So we're actually talking now about a program we had already on the calendar for next week at our Chatham Square branch in Chinatown. And part of the argument being like, let's move on this, because having a discussion with filmmakers who are talking about the value of Chinese Americans to our society and culture, like that conversation still needs to happen right now more than ever. So like, let's do it. Bullfrog has apparently a website just for community screening and discussion. So being able to like be out of the physical space of the library, where my office is exploding with stuff to catalog and process and like all that, this is like the fact that this can be what I'm looking out over is like, how do we add to our services? And that's been thrilling.
Well, that's cool. We've got Jennifer here, Jennifer Gum-Fowler. She's from Kincaid, Kansas, as I mentioned before, and that's I don't know, the township, I think you told me, Jennifer, is 300 something people, and the in-town presence is about 100 or something. This is a
It's
tiny
97 people.
97 people. So I've been there. It's a very nice. You do an excellent job. You're a citizen librarian, and you were involved in founding and putting together the library. You've been getting help from the state library and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to work in and run that library? And can you tell us how the pandemic might have affected you guys?
Yeah, the pandemic has probably affected us a lot, simply because we were just starting up and getting people used to seeing us as a library. So we've got 5 years into it, and then all of a sudden, because of quarantine and stuff, we dropped off the face of the map as far as they're concerned. I have been able to get us a mesh network, so we've got that going at the library, and that pushes all the way out to the football field and out in the parking lot, so people could do their schooling. So that helped.
Because you're what many people probably don't understand is that you are the internet source for many of your residents. They come and they park outside the civic building where your library is, and do all their email and whatever online things they're going to do.
Right. So when our school shut down because of the pandemic, we really had to jump in and fill that gap. So we're doing that this summer. We're also going to do summer lunches. Once the school stops giving out lunches in June, we're going to pick up and run our lunches through July and August until the school picks back up, so that there won't be any week that the kids won't have lunches provided by somebody. So that's a big thing that we've done. Programming is a lot of work when you're only supposed to be there 17 hours and now they want you to do it online.
Yeah.
And that's a lot when it's just one person. Plus I'm trying to figure out how to open up safely. And I am in Kansas, which is very Republican, and it's rural Kansas. So the idea of mask and social distancing is a very political one. And that makes it even a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting, to say the least.
Yeah. Wow. Well, your situation is so different. I'm glad you could talk to us a little bit about that, because it gives us a lot of perspective. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of little tiny libraries out there in the United States, rural communities, and this pandemic has not by any means been friendly to those librarians. I think it would be great if we can spend a few minutes, and thank you very much. Please stay with us here, because there may be some more. Tom Warner and Stacy Bisgard also came on board here. And Tom, could you restate your question for us, or your statement here a little bit?
Oh, hi.
And where you're from?
It was just a comment. I really enjoyed.
Where you're from, John?
Oh, I'm from Enoch Pratt Central Library. We're in Baltimore, and we're a little different from the branches. We're the Central Library, State Library Resource Center, and I work in the AV department there, audiovisual. We have a great collection of like 16mm films, and I was starting to say, before this very crisis hit, we're planning all these rare films we had that people haven't seen before. You know, like a previous speaker was saying, a lot of the community doesn't know the resources you have. So we were doing this series, and that collection is under storage at the library. So we've had to think out of the box and move more to online. And I was saying that now I do a weekly film talk about content offered through the library via Canopy or Hoopla, which are great collections, especially Canopy. But the challenge is, a lot of people that would come to the Central Library would be of minorities or people that were tech challenged. So they would physically come to these big gatherings we would have at our large central library. So that's a challenge now, because those people, they don't have laptops. They can't get all these great services. So what Elena was talking about really spoke to me about how this is the real challenge, is to be format diverse. I've always been an advocate for the streaming services, and I'm really glad they've come along, but we also serve a lot of elderly in our branch, and they still love the DVDs. We have people that still use the VHS, which we have still. So it's an interesting challenge.
I'm a big believer in free enterprise, but I do think that it would be great if we just had universal Wi-Fi all over the country. I mean,
Seriously.
Everybody should be able to log on. It seems like an infrastructure thing that we're way past due for, personally.
Mm-hmm.
Stacy, could you tell us a little bit about where you're from and talk a little bit about what you posted a minute ago?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Stacy, and I work at the Kealakekua Public Library, which is on the Big Island of Hawaii. And so we're part of the statewide system for Hawaii Public Library System. There's 51 libraries. We are a very small branch. We're one room, and we serve a very large rural community. And I mean, space-wise, and probably around, I would say around 10,000 people total, maybe 9 or 10. But our library system is, of course, one large system, and so we've implemented, of course, the online story times, as well as what they're calling HSPLS Create. So librarians are submitting content on YouTube for people to do at home with things they already have, like making your own Play-Doh or, that sort of thing, crafts. And we will be starting our curbside pickup probably next week. Right now, our book drops are open, and we're all in libraries again, so that's nice. But we're doing that, and we're kind of trying to figure out, because we're a small branch, how we can best serve our community. And we have a lot of people that love DVDs. We have a pretty large DVD collection as well. So we're trying to figure out how can we best do that. And one of the ideas that we had was to create sort of a grab and go bag, so people could call us or email us and say, hey, I'm interested in these movies or these books or this genre or this author, and we could create a grab and go bag, because not everybody in our area has access to internet or uses the internet. And so being able to do that is something we were kind of thinking about doing for our patrons, at least from this branch, just because a lot of people just don't have that access here. We have a lot of people that live up on the mountain and in, the woods, and no internet. So we're just trying to think of things, how we can really help them through all this.
Wow, that's great. Is library funding pretty good in Hawaii? Is that a
So our funding is from the state, and of course our only revenue source is from tourism. So right now we're pretty much closed down for tourism, and we will definitely be having budget cuts. I'm guessing they haven't told us yet, but I'm guessing there'll be some pretty big cuts for our, of course, our book budget, operating budget. I know we're in a hiring freeze, so we have our library has a great friends group that is usually willing to buy us all kinds of stuff if we ask real nice. So hopefully we'll be able to get some support from them. But it'll definitely be a challenge, I think, once the new fiscal year begins, to see what money we won't have.
Okay. We're getting close to the end. I want to get a word in here before we close, but I think we might have time to come back and maybe deal with one or two more questions. Just wanted to say thanks before we end to Janet and Elena and everyone else who's participated today. Thanks very much to Charles Cobine, whose presence is always appreciated. To all our attendees, if you think Video Trust is something you'd like to continue with, bear in mind that we'll be offering memberships soon that'll allow you to attend all the webinars and access all of our publishing. We're going to be doing a lot more. We have quite a few plans for the future. And every segment of the library world is our target audience. We want to help all librarians, especially with issues involving film, moving images of any kind. More coming on this soon. Please go to videotrust.org, subscribe to our newsletter so you can keep up with what we're doing. You'll find a collection of our webinar videos from this year under the professional development site page there. And we provide information on technology, copyright, resources, much, much more. We want to hear from you about what you want in terms of programming, so speak up. Please contact me. I'm Jeff Tamblin, and I'm at chair@videotrust.org. We have just a couple of minutes left here. Jennifer, did you hear anything from Hawaii that you thought you might be able to use in Kansas? Are you there?
I'm here. I'm trying to do 3 different things.
I bet. That's normal. Did you hear anything from Stacy in Hawaii that rang any bells with you?
I like the idea that they're doing those instructional craft videos. I don't know how I do that in Kansas, but right now in Kansas, everyone's going back to kind of like the homesteading idea and has jumped on that bandwagon with gardening and canning and things like that. So I think it would be fun to do one of those and see if I could get any hits on my Facebook. That's really a big deal for me right now, is hits on the Facebook.
Okay, interesting. Well, we're just about to wrap up here, but again, I want to thank everybody who participated today, and especially our panelists and my co-host. Thank you so much for all your input. We're going to be back soon, and we have academic librarians follow-up to the pandemic coming up next week, and then on June 11th, of course, the beginning, the instructional webinar for librarians who are new to streaming. That's going to be great. Thank you all very much. We're gonna close up now, and I appreciate it. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you.